Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Tafaras Buchiwe. This is ZTN Prime broadcasting to you from our ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, coming up on The Mint, Zimbabwe's tourism sector is on an upward trajectory following the launch of the Tourism and Hospitality Industry Policy 2025-2030. With 3 million visitors recorded in 2024, Zimbabwe ranked 6th in Africa's most visited destinations, according to Africa Facts Zone. Tourism now contributes 12% to GDP and is being positioned a key pillar of economic growth. Now, the new policy targets $5 billion in annual receipts by 2030, anchored on 12 tourism development clusters. It also seeks to formalize platforms like Airbnb, boost domestic travel, and attract investment through channels such as Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. Now, today in discussion, we hear from an in-house analyst. Now, don't go away. The Mint will be right back. You're watching The Mint right here on ZTN Prime. Now, Zimbabwe has launched its tourism policy 2025-2030, targeting $5 billion in annual revenue by 2030. With 3 million visitors in 2024, the country ranks 6th in Africa according to Africa Facts Zone. Now, the plan focuses on tourism clusters, infrastructure, Airbnb regulation, domestic travel, and investment through platforms like the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. We speak to Eben Mabunda, financial analyst and business anchor here at ZTN Prime on The Mint. And hi, Eben, how are you doing this afternoon?
Can't complain, should only get better. A pleasure to be seated this side of the conversation.
And how does it feel sitting on that side of the conversation?
Absolutely amazing.
Right, let's get straight into it. Now, of course, Eben, we're talking about the policy, the tourism and industrial and hospitality industry policy for 2025-2030 to chart a new course for the sector. From your perspective now, what are the standout or innovations in this policy?
Well, of course, the policy was launched by His Excellency, the President, on Monday, and of course key stakeholders from the tourism sector were present, including, of course, the Minister of Tourism, Minister Barbara Rodzi. And when you look at the policy, it seeks to, of course, grow the sector significantly. It looks at growing domestic tourism, increasing the number of international visitors that visit Zimbabwe as a destination. It also seeks to establish cross-linkages with other players within the region. You look at Zambia, you look at South Africa, that also receive a fair share of international visitors. And so it's perhaps what I would look at as a two-pronged approach: growing domestic tourism vis-a-vis, of course, increasing regional and international tourism. As it stands, the bulk of the revenue that is generated from the tourism sector is actually generated from local or domestic tourists. So the question and the puzzle is, how can there be a growth in terms of there being a rise where regional and international tourists are concerned? So that then becomes the core and the thrust of what this policy is seeking to achieve. At the same time, there'll also be other aspects as digital and how to see to it that infrastructure is improved within this particular sector.
Right, of course, we shall be digging deep into some of the issues that you've raised in terms of how do we then attract more international tourists coming into the country. You talk about it being at the present moment predominantly local tourism, if I may put it across. Now, the policy sets an ambitious goal of $5 billion in annual receipts by 2030. So that's in 5 years' time. Now, what key strategies or enablers do you believe will be most critical in achieving this target? I think this is a very key question.
Absolutely, it is a key question. Now, $5 billion is quite an interesting target. When you look at the trend line for Zimbabwe, the highest amount that was generated from the sector from a revenue perspective was $1.3 billion. That was in 2018, 2019. And the $300 from that particular figure was actually generated in the domestic currency, while the $1 billion came through as hard currency. And so you'll find out that when we got into COVID-19, there was a dip as a result of a slowdown where international tourism was concerned. Of course, the restrictions where that came into being 2020, 2021, 2022 then saw a resumption, and it's been an upward trajectory since 2022 moving up to this point. And when you look at the 2024 statistics, they came in at about 1.18 billion United States dollars. And so the target now to reach $5 billion would require, of course, a huge degree of what I would call missionary intensity to see to it that we're able to increase and not only surpass the 2018-2019 high that was achieved by the sector, but to grow over and beyond that. It will be critical to invest where the country's infrastructure is concerned. The trip from Bulawayo to Victoria Falls is very much of a sad one, owing to the sad state of that particular road. However, from the authorities, there are efforts that are seeking to transform that very narrative. The same would be said about the trip from Chinhoyi moving right up to Kariba. That road again needs to be revamped as a means of encouraging domestic tourism. You look at the domestic airports that we've got in the country, a good number of them, you cannot fly beyond 6 p.m. because there are no lights at a good number of these airports. So all of these elements will need to be factored in as a means of revamping the tourism sector and working towards hitting a $5 billion target. But so I must say that would be pretty much a stretch.
That would be pretty much a stretch, you say. And from what I'm hearing from you, you are saying that this is not only incumbent on the tourism ministry, but it's actually dependent on other ministries. For example, the Minister of Transport and Infrastructural Development in the country, in terms of making sure that there is the ease of access to certain areas in terms of road rehabilitation or road construction thereof.
Absolutely.
Right. And you talk of no lights. That's energy there as well. So
perhaps just to jump in there, it's not an energy issue.
Right.
It's actually the infrastructure has deteriorated over time.
Right.
And so you cannot fly, for example, if you want to fly to Marondera, if you take off from the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport, by the time you, let's say you take off at 6 p.m., by the time you land at 7 p.m., there is no infrastructure at Marondera, at the aerodrome there, for them to be able to receive you. The same can be said about Mutare and some of the smaller aerodromes that we've got across the country. Now, imagine what would happen if the matrix were to be turned over.
Of course. That would, increase tourism, tourists coming into the country, because they can come in, there's the flexibility of coming even at night, in the morning, or even in the afternoon. There's absolutely no impediments.
Correct.
So now, moving on to the next question, Victoria Falls remains Zimbabwe's tourism crown jewel. How significant is the planned 10,000-seater cricket stadium to transforming the city into a world-class sports and meetings, incentives, conference and exhibition destination? And of course, you would be aware that that cricket stadium is being constructed for the 2027 Cricket World Cup. That's also Zimbabwe is co-hosting together with South Africa and Namibia. So maybe to put that into context, that it's an activity where you would have international guests coming into the country as well.
Fantastic. I think that's a noble initiative. My opinion would be Victoria Falls is a majestic wonder of the world, as it were, the Mosia Tunya. And it has, of course, been a center of attraction for the longest time, right up to this particular point. But my opinion would be it's important to make it a wholesome experience as one gets to visit Victoria Falls. You will visit the falls, you will visit the Wanga National Park, but really there is a cap in terms of the activities that you can do in Victoria Falls.
Okay.
The argument would be then, how can we build Victoria Falls beyond the iconic Victoria Falls, the Mosia Tunya? How can we build beyond the Wange Safari? How can we build and have a wholesome experience for a visitor? For context, let me juxtapose that to Cape Town. When you visit Cape Town, you will love, of course, the ocean there, but there will also be the Robben Island facility. That's also a part and parcel of your experience when you visit Cape Town. You'd also look at the well and established city that you'd want to experience when you visit the Cape Town. You'd also have the Table Mountains. I'm just hand-picking a few elements that would make the experience to Cape Town very much favorable. So in the same vein, I'm saying it's critical that that stadium is built. When I spoke to the Minister of Finance on Monday, I asked him about the bill for that, and he said that's a $3 million target, $3 million project. He was hesitant to speak in terms of timeline, but as you correctly mentioned, that the 2027 Cricket World Cup, of course, could perhaps be a precursor to what we could look at in terms of timelines. But over and above everything, I think it's necessary for there to be other aspects that are inculcated into Victoria Falls to make it a wholesome experience for a tourist.
Right. Now, moving away from what meets the eye, that Mosia Tunya, the Wange National Park, the animals that you'd find there, let's talk about the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange that has been positioned as a vehicle to attract tourism-related investment. How well is the sector utilizing platforms like the VFAX to raise capital and partner with investors?
Right. The concept of the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange is a noble one. However, I believe that more should and could be done to improve the state of affairs there. It was, of course, established as an offshore destination and is the only US dollar taking stock exchange that you will find on the continent of Africa. So the concept behind Victoria Falls Stock Exchange and that investment area is to sort of mimic what you'd find in Mauritius. Mauritius has become very popular in Africa because of the tax incentives and initiatives that are found in Mauritius. I know a good number of Zimbabwean businesses that are domiciled in Mauritius. A good example would be the Econet Group. While you find that Econet Wireless is listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, but the group itself is domiciled in Mauritius. Why? Because of the tax incentives that you will find in Mauritius. Now, suppose we are to build Victoria Falls around that kind of an initiative. I know a big business in Zimbabwe that is seeking to register in Victoria Falls. They employ over 1,000 people, but because Victoria Falls, they have tried to come up with a system where you can negotiate or navigate some of the taxes. There is that incentive for that business to actually go and register and domicile itself in Victoria Falls. So I believe that if Victoria Falls, the implementation around that zone can be accelerated or catalyzed, perhaps more fortunes would be gleaned, and that could contribute positively toward Victoria Falls as an investment destination within Zimbabwe.
Right. Now, sites like Great Zimbabwe and Masvingo, Nyanga, Kariba, the Eastern Highlands and Chinoi Caves, they remain underexploited. Now, how can the new policy unlock full value of these destinations?
Let me respond by means of a fresh illustration.
Right.
Just yesterday, the outgoing EU ambassador to Zimbabwe, His Excellency Jobst von Kirkman, was seated right where I'm seated.
Okay.
And he made, of course, his exit quite clear that he's set to leave Zimbabwe later today. Now, this morning he paid a courtesy call to President Emerson Mnangagwa, and in that courtesy call, of course, they had some deliberations around their engagements with Zimbabwe.
Right, and of course, I'll have to cut you there. Even we have to take a break. Don't go away. We will be continuing with the conversation when we come back.
Harare. Tune into the beat.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, your source for news, business, sports, fashion, and more.
Experience the pulse of Harare's culture and lifestyle.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, Harare's top radio station.
Join the conversation with Zimbabwe's top personalities.
Subscribe now for fresh and infotainment content daily.
Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's heartbeat.
You're watching The Mint right here on ZTN Prime. Now, we left off where Eben, you were talking to me about exploring the full value of some of the tourist places that we have in Zimbabwe, that being Masvingo, Nyanga, Kariba, Eastern Highlands, and the Chinoi Caves, and how we can unlock value of these destinations.
This morning, the wife to the EU ambassador to Zimbabwe, the outgoing, said in the courtesy call meeting that they'd visited the great Zimbabwe just about 2 months back. And she said something that really resonated with this conversation. She said, you've got a beautiful site at the great Zimbabwe, but she said, I feel that the place is not being marketed enough. She said, there are some very nice sites that you find in Zimbabwe, but not enough noise is being made around them. So she cited the Great Zimbabwe as a site that must be well marketed out there, and as an investment destination, an alternative to the Victoria Falls that you find in Zimbabwe. So there's some of these sites that need more marketing, I would put it.
So more marketing, you would put it for places like the Great Zimbabwe,
Nyanga,
and the Eastern Highlands.
Absolutely.
So quite a number of places that we have in Zimbabwe. So that, of course, we'll get deeper into that as we go through, our conversation. Now, how can Zimbabwe better market and develop shared cross-border experiences with neighbors such as Zambia, Mozambique, and Botswana, particularly around attractions like the Zambezi, Victoria Falls, and Transfrontier Parks?
I think that dialogue would be absolutely important, but to paint a better picture of the current situation, there are visitors that come from Europe and they visit South Africa, and Victoria Falls is presented by certain South African agencies as a destination within South Africa.
Oh,
all right. And so they will leave the Victoria Falls thinking that they were actually in South Africa
when they were in Zimbabwe.
When they were actually in Zimbabwe. So I think that more should be done in terms of engaging with our neighbors, and also putting ourselves out there, getting to be more elaborate. It's unfortunate that the sentiment that you find about Zimbabwe out there is very much on the negative. But as you engage with business players that visit Zimbabwe, the experience that they have is very well different from what being painted out there. So I would think that there is need for a better marketing, more engagement with our neighbors, and perhaps more featuring of Zimbabwe at some of the key international events that happen in the world of tourism.
Now, do you feel, still on that, do you feel that we, maybe in times past, that we have lost some of the tourists that would be originally, or rather ideally, be coming to Zimbabwe, but then end up going to South Africa, or end up going to Zambia, or going to our neighboring countries, when we actually should be the ones who hosting them?
Yeah, again, it comes back to the aspect of publicity. I believe that we need a nationwide approach that seeks to present the Zimbabwean story better. We are not telling our story, somebody else is telling the story on behalf of Zimbabwe. So I believe that again, with the theme of engagement and re-engagement, it's high time that a better story of Zimbabwe is told, so that we're able to attract more people coming to our tourist destinations.
Now, I did say that we were going to get deeper into this issue of infrastructure and modernizing our infrastructure. Now, because what the next question I'm going to ask you is, what role will ongoing and future infrastructure projects such as airport modernization, the road networks, and digital infrastructure play in enhancing destination accessibility and competitiveness?
Look, historically, air transport in Zimbabwe was very well established. You had aerodromes that were very well connected. Right now we speak of Bulawayo, we speak of the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport as the key, as well as of course the Victoria Falls Airport as the key airports that we've got in the country. And yet in times past, you would find that there were aerodromes that were fully operational across the country, even in Chipinge. I once stayed in Chipinge some many years back, and you'd find there was a functional and a well operational aerodrome that could receive flights any time of the day. But right now, that is not the case. So if we were to revitalize the smaller airports that we've got across the country, it would make travel even easier. Now, speaking of infrastructure, do you know that it's cheaper to fly to Tanzania than it is to fly to Victoria Falls? Let's be specific.
Wow.
You'd need about 320 United States dollars to fly to Tanzania and back. But to fly to Victoria Falls, you need about 350 US dollars. So therein lies the challenge. The big question is, how can we change that narrative? I proved this. I flew to Tanzania in March this year, and just to visit their Zanzibar destination, and you'd find the cost of getting to be on holiday in Zanzibar is cheaper than what you'd find in Victoria Falls. So the question is, how do we transform that particular matrix where Zimbabwe is concerned in terms of the travel in Zimbabwe?
What you're saying, the point you're raising, does not speak well to domestic tourism, does it? Because ideally, if it's cheaper for me to go to Zanzibar, then of course, as economics would have it, I would perhaps go to Zanzibar and then schedule Victoria Falls later on.
Right. So this is why I'm saying, if we fix the transport aspect in terms of Zimbabwe, and also come in by means of reducing the regulatory costs of doing business within the sector, you'd find you need about to navigate 17 tax heads if you're a tourism operator operating in Zimbabwe. All right, and that's cumbersome for business operators. So if we are to open up the space, have more operators, be it lodges, that could perhaps make the cost of traveling to Victoria Falls somewhat cheaper by means of accommodation, but also especially where the aspect of travel, the aspect of travel would be a key one. If air travel to Victoria Falls as an illustration. If there were flights introduced to fly to Nyanga, you're flying to Kariba, and the cost is very well reasonable, that would lower the cost of traveling in Zimbabwe and increase the number of tourist people that are coming into Zimbabwe. So these are issues that the powers that be need to attend to sooner rather than later.
Right. And of course, not long ago, I think the briefing from the cabinet was they're going to address the issue of the cost of doing business in Zimbabwe. So we do hope and trust that, of course, like you alluded to, that will be attended to sooner rather than later. Now, there's a key question that I have for you here. Now, do you believe Zimbabwe's local conference facilities in cities like Harare, Bulawayo, and Victoria Falls are competitive enough to attract regional and continental business events? What upgrades are necessary, if there are any upgrades that are necessary?
I will tell you that the facilities that we have are regionally competitive. Right. You look at the facilities that we've got in Zimbabwe, and you compare them with what you'd find elsewhere on the continent. I would say that we are in the upper quadrant, in the first quadrant rather. Of course, would lag behind advanced countries like South Africa and Egypt. Of course, those countries would be performing way better than us in terms of tourism. Algeria, which is 5th place, Zimbabwe is placed 6th in terms of the places that are most frequented or most visited by tourists in Africa. But when you look at what we have got, of course, we need to upgrade somewhat, especially from a digital perspective, and see to that we are able to meet international standards, as it were. But what I would highlight is that from a conferencing perspective, we need more rooms to be able to accommodate. You should just look at what happens when there is the ZITF in Bulawayo. There's a shortage of rooms in Bulawayo as when the ZITF is had. So we need more structures going up. We need more structures here in Harare. There was the Ramsar convention that took place on Zimbabwean soil. 3,000 visitors were in the country. And again, there was also the subject of the need to increase the accommodation facilities that we have, especially ahead of the 2027 sporting event that you made reference to. So there is need to see to it that we are able to increase the number of rooms that we've got in Zimbabwe.
So to augment the 10,000-seater cricket stadium that they're going to be constructing in Victoria Falls, you would also advocate that we would have accommodation facilities as well to augment that, so that we can, harvest as much as we can in terms of inflows in the tourism sector.
Yeah, because if we are co-hosting with other countries, that means that we've got. It means that we're somehow competing.
I was about to come to that. So we need to be competitive.
Yes, constructively competitive.
Right. Now, the new policy expands the definition of tourism, including medical, creative, religious, and educational tourism. Now, which of these do you see having the greatest potential in Zimbabwe, and why?
All right, low-hanging fruits. You look at the ZCC.
Maybe you can answer that quickly.
Right. The ZCC has 9 million followers in South Africa, and maybe about 1.5 million to 2 million followers that you find here in Zimbabwe. So as they have their joint events, we should be looking at how can we make Zimbabwe more lucrative, such that as and when they have their joint conferences, they're able to have them more frequently here in Zimbabwe than they would in South Africa and in Mozambique.
Right. And of course, I don't know if I can just squeeze one more, like platforms like Airbnb will now be regulated under the new policy. How can Zimbabwe strike a balance between innovation, quality control, and support for small-scale tourism entrepreneurs in this digital age? Quickly.
I would say let's support what you'll find there and see to that we're able to increase the revenues. We need Airbnb and Airbnb needs Zimbabwe. So let's meet halfway. Let's not be punitive, but let's go with the flow in line with regional and international trends.
Thank you so much, Eben. Well, unfortunately, time is always a constraint. Otherwise, would have loved to continue with the conversation. Now, that's it for today's episode of The Mint. Now, join us at 1400 hours Central African time for The Mint. That's on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And on Wednesday, we have Beat the Market at 2 o'clock. That's 1400 hours Central African time. But that's it from myself, Tafara Sibuchiwe, and it was a pleasure to have you. Join me tomorrow, 6 a.m. up and early for Morning Rush. Until then, have a profitable afternoon.